The hotel lobby was full of life that evening. The tall glass doors kept swinging open and shut as guests stepped in with their heavy luggage, laughing children, and tired faces after long flights. The place smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers, with soft music playing in the background. The chandeliers above sparkled like stars, and the marble floor shone so brightly that reflections of people walking could be seen clearly. Staff members moved around quickly, smiling politely, offering drinks, and guiding guests to the reception desk. It was the kind of place where people came to feel important, to show that they belonged to a world of luxury and elegance. Among all this movement, a man walked in quietly. He wasn't like the others. He didn't have designer clothes, expensive watches, or a bodyguard trailing behind. He wore a simple dark jacket, faded jeans, and an old baseball cap pulled low over his head. A small backpack rested on his shoulder, looking well used, as though it had been on long journeys. His shoes were plain and slightly worn, the kind of shoes that had walked many miles. He moved with ease, calm and unhurried, unlike the other guests who seemed eager to show their importance. At first, most people didn't notice him. Guests were too busy checking in, staff too occupied attending to wealthy travelers. But there was one person who noticed right away: the hotel manager. He stood near the reception desk, tall and stiff, with his suit pressed perfectly and a name tag shining on his chest. His eyes scanned the lobby constantly, making sure everything appeared flawless. When his gaze fell upon the man in the simple jacket and old cap, his expression changed. His eyebrows drew together, his lips pressed into a thin line, and he took a step forward. To the manager, appearance meant everything. The hotel was a place of prestige, where the rich came to feel comfortable among their own kind. In his mind, this man, with his plain look and humble belongings, did not fit. He decided quickly, without knowing anything, that the stranger was out of place. With his chin raised high, the manager walked straight toward him, his shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Excuse me," the manager said in a voice that carried across the lobby. Several staff members looked up immediately, curious. A few guests nearby paused, sensing a scene about to unfold. The man in the cap stopped walking and turned politely, his face calm. He didn't say anything yet, only waited with patient eyes. The manager folded his arms. "You don't belong here, poor guy," he said, his tone sharp and dismissive. His words floated in the air, cutting through the soft music, catching everyone's ears. A small laugh escaped one of the bellboys who was standing nearby, and a few staff members exchanged amused looks. They trusted their boss's judgment and assumed he was right, that the man had no business in such a grand place. The stranger's lips curved into the smallest smile. He didn't look angry, didn't protest. Instead, he simply asked in a soft voice, "Could you tell me where the restaurant is?" His voice was calm, almost kind, as though the insult hadn't touched him at all. His question made a few people blink in surprise. The bellboy who had laughed felt suddenly unsure, glancing away awkwardly. But the manager, feeling even more confident in his assumption, shook his head. "Our restaurant is reserved for guests," he replied coldly. "I suggest you try somewhere else. There are cheaper places down the street." His words carried both arrogance and dismissal, as if he had just done the hotel a favor by keeping its image safe. The man gave a small nod, as though he understood, and said nothing more. He turned slightly and walked toward one of the seats in the lobby. He moved with grace, not hurried, not offended, just quietly settling down in the corner as though none of it had mattered. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving lightly across the screen. He seemed peaceful, untouched by the rude words that had been thrown at him. The lobby, however, was not peaceful anymore. Guests whispered to each other, trying to figure out who the man was. A mother leaned close to her husband and said, "He seems so calm, maybe he is someone important." The husband shook his head but kept glancing at the stranger with curiosity. A young receptionist bit her lip, whispering softly to a colleague, "Maybe he really is just a traveler, sir shouldn't have spoken like that." Her colleague shrugged, too afraid to disagree with the manager openly. The manager, meanwhile, felt proud. He turned to his staff and said in a low but firm voice, "This is how you protect the hotel's reputation. We cannot allow just anyone to walk in and lower our standards." He smiled to himself, unaware that the ground beneath him was about to shift. The man in the cap stayed seated, his phone in hand, quietly waiting. He didn't fidget or look around nervously like someone guilty of trespassing. Instead, his posture was calm, relaxed, almost as though he knew something no one else did. A few minutes passed. Then something small but powerful happened. A boy of about 10 years old walked through the lobby with his mother. He stopped suddenly, his eyes wide. He tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at the man in the cap. "Mom," he said loudly, his voice breaking the quiet tension. "That's Keanu Reeves?" The lobby froze. Heads turned quickly, eyes widened, mouths dropped open. Guests who had been whispering now stared openly. Staff who had smirked before were left speechless. A few people grabbed their phones, snapping pictures as excitement bubbled in the air. The man in the cap looked up gently, smiled at the boy, and gave him a small wave. His identity was revealed in an instant. The manager's heart sank. His proud posture broke, his face drained of color, and for the first time that evening, he didn't know what to say. The man he had mocked, the poor guy he thought didn't belong, was one of the most respected and beloved actors in the world. Keanu Reeves. The moment the boy shouted his name, the whole lobby changed. People who had been sitting with their coffee cups stood up quickly, trying to see if it was really true. The sound of chairs scraping across the floor filled the room. Phones were lifted into the air, flashes began to sparkle, and voices rose with excitement. Guests whispered loudly, some even gasping, "It really is him. That's Keanu Reeves?" The man who had been sitting quietly in the corner lifted his head. His baseball cap was still pulled low, but now his face could be seen clearly. It was gentle, calm, and familiar to millions of people across the world. The same face that had appeared in countless movies, the same smile that fans adored. There was no doubt anymore. It was him. Keanu Reeves? The little boy who had spotted him stared with wide eyes, frozen in amazement. Keanu gave him a warm smile and a small wave. The boy's mother gasped softly, embarrassed at the noise her son had made, but Keanu's kind gesture melted her worry. The boy grinned so widely that his cheeks hurt, clutching his mother's arm as if he had just discovered a superhero sitting in front of him. The staff stood still like statues. The bellboy who had laughed earlier felt his cheeks burn with shame. He lowered his head, wishing he could disappear. The receptionist who had whispered doubts about the manager's judgment now looked at Keanu with awe, her hands trembling as she tried to continue typing on her computer. She had never expected to see such a famous person right there, in front of her. And then there was the manager. He was frozen in place. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His chest tightened as the realization sank deeper. He had called one of the most respected and beloved celebrities in the world a poor guy. He had told him he didn't belong. His pride shattered instantly, and his thoughts raced. What have I done? How could I not recognize him? The weight of his mistake pressed heavily on his shoulders. Meanwhile, Keanu remained calm. He didn't stand up quickly or make a big announcement. Instead, he slowly rose from his seat, adjusted his cap, and gave a small nod to the guests who had recognized him. The lobby erupted into whispers and soft applause. People began pulling out their phones to record videos, eager to capture the moment. Some were already uploading pictures to social media, typing captions like "Spotted Keanu Reeves at our hotel." Keanu walked toward the reception desk, his steps steady, his face peaceful. The receptionist's hands shook even more as she tried to remain professional. "Yes, sir, can I help you?" she asked nervously, though she already knew who he was. "Yes, please," Keanu said kindly, his voice calm and smooth. "I was just wondering if your restaurant has vegetarian options." His tone was simple, polite, without any sign of arrogance. It was the same question he had asked earlier, but this time the staff listened carefully. The receptionist nodded quickly. "Why yes, sir, of course. We have a full vegetarian menu. I can bring it for you right away." She nearly stumbled in her hurry to grab the menu. Her colleague rushed to assist, both of them desperate to make up for the coldness that Keanu had faced just minutes ago. The manager finally forced himself to move. His legs felt heavy, but he walked forward, trying to put on a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Sir, Mr. Reeves," he stammered, I must apologize. I didn't recognize you. I had no idea. Please forgive me." His voice shook, and sweat beaded on his forehead. Keanu looked at him with steady eyes. There was no anger in them, no harshness, only calmness. "Everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are," he said softly. His words were simple, yet they carried weight. They echoed across the lobby, reaching every ear. Some guests nodded, others whispered their agreement. The staff lowered their heads, ashamed that they hadn't stood up earlier when the manager mocked him. The manager's throat tightened. He wanted to say something more, but no words seemed enough. He had been exposed, not only for his mistake but also for his character. His arrogance had been revealed in front of the very guests he wanted to impress. He stepped back, silent, his face burning red. Keanu, however, didn't linger on the moment. He accepted the menu from the receptionist with a gentle smile and thanked her sincerely. She blushed, overwhelmed by the kindness he showed even after being insulted. He walked calmly toward the restaurant, moving slowly as guests along the way tried to greet him. He stopped often, giving small waves, taking photos with fans, and signing napkins and scraps of paper with a borrowed pen. A woman sitting with her family stood up nervously, holding her phone. "Mr. Reeves, could I take a picture with you?" she asked shyly. "Of course," he said warmly. He leaned slightly toward her, posed casually, and smiled for the photo. The woman's hands trembled as she pressed the button, and her children squealed in delight. A businessman nearby, usually stern and reserved, grinned like a child as Keanu shook his hand. "I've watched every one of your movies," he said breathlessly. Keanu chuckled softly and thanked him, making the man beam with pride. Within minutes, the lobby felt like a celebration. People who had been strangers now shared the same excitement, exchanging stories about their favorite Keanu Reeves movies. The receptionist whispered to her colleague, "Can you believe he's so humble? He didn't even get angry." Her colleague nodded, whispering back, "I feel guilty for laughing earlier. He's teaching us more just by standing here than our manager has in years." The manager watched all of this from the side, his heart heavy. Each smile Keanu gave, each gentle word he spoke, made the manager realize how badly he had failed. He hadn't just insulted a celebrity, he had insulted a human being who treated others with more kindness than most people ever did. Meanwhile, social media was already buzzing. Guests who had snapped photos began posting them instantly. Captions spread quickly, "Keanu Reeves insulted by hotel manager but stays calm and kind. Respect everyone lesson from Keanu in real life." The incident was becoming bigger by the second. People outside the hotel began calling, asking if the rumors were true. Keanu finally entered the restaurant. Instead of demanding privacy or special service, he chose a small table in the corner, where he could sit quietly. He opened the menu and looked through it with interest, smiling when he found the vegetarian section. When the waiter came to take his order, Keanu thanked him warmly and asked about the chef's recommendations. The waiter, nervous but excited, suggested a few dishes, and Keanu listened carefully, nodding as though every word mattered. Back in the lobby, the guests continued to talk about what they had just seen. Some said they would never forget it. Others admitted that they had judged him too at first but now felt guilty. The staff remained shaken, still whispering among themselves, trying to process how quickly everything had changed. The manager stayed near the reception desk, unable to leave, trapped in his own regret. His mistake would not only haunt him but would soon become known far beyond the walls of the hotel. The restaurant inside the hotel was quieter than the lobby. Soft lights glowed from elegant lamps, and the gentle sound of a piano floated through the air. The tables were neatly arranged with fine cutlery, shining glasses, and folded napkins. Waiters moved gracefully from one table to another, balancing trays with practiced ease. Guests dined quietly, unaware of the storm of whispers still flowing outside in the lobby. When Keanu Reeves stepped into the restaurant, a few people noticed immediately. They gasped quietly, then smiled, nudging their companions. A couple at a corner table dropped their forks, their eyes wide as they recognized him. He gave them a small wave, which made them beam with excitement. Despite the attention, Keanu walked calmly, not rushing, not drawing unnecessary notice. He was used to being recognized, but he carried himself with humility that softened every stare. The waiter who had guided him to a table stood straighter, nervous but eager. "This way, sir," he said, leading him to a comfortable spot near the window. The night view sparkled outside, with city lights shining like jewels. Keanu nodded his thanks, sat down quietly, and opened the menu again. He took his time, reading carefully. When the waiter returned, Keanu asked gently, "What vegetarian dishes would you recommend?" His voice was polite, curious, without any hint of superiority. The waiter, though still nervous, relaxed slightly at his kindness. He suggested a few options: the roasted vegetable risotto, the lentil soup, and a special garden salad. Keanu listened attentively, nodding with genuine interest, and finally said, "I'll take the risotto, please. And a glass of water will be perfect." The waiter hurried off, almost floating with pride that he had just taken Keanu Reeves' order. Other waiters whispered to one another, glancing at him with admiration. Some had seen celebrities before, but rarely one who was so gentle, so approachable. Back in the lobby, the scene was still buzzing. Guests who had caught a glimpse of him rushed to tell others, and staff members exchanged whispers, some still unable to believe what had happened. The receptionist who had been kind enough to question the manager's behavior earlier felt a quiet sense of pride. She knew deep down that the stranger deserved respect even before his name was revealed. The manager, however, was restless. He paced near the desk, his thoughts heavy. He replayed the moment again and again, the words he had spoken, the dismissive tone, the laughter that had followed. Now, all of it seemed unforgivable. His face burned with shame each time he remembered. His pride, once so firm, had cracked like glass. The staff avoided looking directly at him, whispering behind his back. He knew he had become the villain of the evening. Inside the restaurant, Keanu sat peacefully, waiting for his meal. A few guests, braver than others, approached him shyly. A young couple walked over, the woman clutching her phone nervously. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, "we're so sorry to disturb you, but, would it be possible to take a picture with you?" Keanu smiled warmly. "Of course," he said. He stood up, posed with them, and even cracked a small joke that made them laugh. "Make sure I don't look too tired in this picture," he said, and the couple left with their hearts full, whispering excitedly as they walked back to their table. Another family approached, a father, mother, and their teenage daughter. The girl's hands shook as she held her phone. Keanu noticed and spoke gently to her, "Don't worry, you're doing great." His words calmed her instantly, and she managed to take the photo without trembling. She walked back glowing, telling her parents she would never forget the moment. More and more guests admired him, not only because he was a famous actor, but because he treated everyone with equal kindness. He didn't brush anyone off, didn't show annoyance. He gave each person his attention, as if their request was the most important thing in the world at that moment. When his food arrived, Keanu thanked the waiter with genuine warmth. He tasted the risotto, nodded approvingly, and said, "This is wonderful, please thank the chef for me." The waiter's face lit up, and he rushed to the kitchen to deliver the message. The chef, upon hearing it, nearly dropped his spoon in excitement. "Keanu Reeves liked my cooking," he exclaimed proudly to the entire staff. Meanwhile, in the lobby, the tension between the staff and the manager grew heavier. A group of guests had already posted videos online showing the moment the manager dismissed Keanu. Those clips spread quickly, gaining comments and reactions. People praised Keanu for staying calm and criticized the manager for judging someone by appearance. By the time the clock struck 9, the hotel's phone was ringing with reporters asking questions. Staff members could hear the buzz from their devices, and whispers spread that the hotel might face serious embarrassment in the news. The receptionist, watching all of this unfold, felt torn. She wanted to do something to make things right, but she knew it was not her place to challenge the manager openly. Still, she made a quiet decision. The next time she saw Keanu, she would treat him with the kindness and respect he deserved, no matter what. As Keanu finished his meal, a small group of fans waited near the entrance of the restaurant. They didn't want to disturb him while he ate, but they hoped for a moment when he was done. True to his nature, Keanu noticed them and walked over before leaving. He greeted them one by one, shook hands, posed for pictures, and even signed napkins when they couldn't find anything else for an autograph. One young boy said shyly, "Mr. Reeves, you're my hero." Keanu bent slightly, looked him in the eyes, and said kindly, "Thank you, but remember you can be your own hero, too." The boy's face lit up as though he had just been given the greatest gift of his life. The manager, standing at a distance, watched everything unfold. Each smile, each kind word, was a painful reminder of his own failure. He realized that no amount of money, no expensive suit, no position of power could create the respect that Keanu carried naturally. Respect didn't come from wealth or titles, it came from how you treated others. By the time Keanu left the restaurant, the entire mood of the hotel had shifted. The lobby no longer felt like a place of arrogance and pride, but a place where humility had been shown in its purest form. Guests clapped quietly as he walked past, not because he was a celebrity, but because he had shown them the value of dignity. Keanu nodded to them politely, thanked the staff with a smile, and disappeared into the elevator, leaving behind a silence filled with admiration. For those who had witnessed it, the night would be unforgettable. The manager stood still, his heart heavy with regret. He knew that tomorrow, the whole world would hear about what happened. And he knew that no excuse could erase the truth that he had judged wrongly, and the man he insulted had taught him a lesson without raising his voice. By the next morning, the story had already left the walls of the hotel. What began as whispers in the lobby turned into videos and photos spreading across the internet like wildfire. Guests who had witnessed the moment posted their clips online, and in just a few hours, headlines appeared everywhere. People wrote captions like, "Manager insults man, not realizing it's Keanu Reeves, his response is pure class," and "A lesson in humility from Keanu Reeves at a luxury hotel." The comments poured in by the thousands. Some praised Keanu for his calm reaction, others criticized the arrogance of the manager. Inside the hotel, staff were nervous. Phones at the reception rang non-stop with reporters asking questions. Guests were also whispering, some checking their devices and showing each other the trending posts. The receptionist, who had always felt the manager was too proud, watched everything unfold with quiet relief. At last, people outside were seeing what she and others had experienced for years. The manager, however, was restless. He hadn't slept well. Dark circles shadowed his eyes as he paced around his office, replaying the incident in his mind. His career felt like it was hanging by a thread. The corporate office of the hotel had already called him early in the morning, their voices sharp with anger. "What were you thinking? Do you realize what this has done to our reputation?" they demanded. He stammered through excuses, saying he hadn't recognized Keanu, but the response was cold. Recognition isn't the point. Respect should not depend on appearance. Meanwhile, Keanu woke up in his suite, far calmer than anyone else in the building. He prepared for his day quietly, drinking a cup of tea and enjoying the sunrise from his window. To him, the previous evening wasn't about being insulted or about being recognized later. It was about the simple truth he had spoken: everyone deserves respect. He had no interest in revenge or making the manager suffer. His mind was already on the people he would meet that day, the projects he was working on, and the peace of living simply. Back in the lobby, guests continued to arrive and leave. Some checked in excitedly, hoping to catch a glimpse of Keanu, who had become the talk of the hotel. Others whispered about the incident, pointing discreetly at the staff as though trying to find out who the rude manager was. The staff themselves behaved differently. The bellboy who had once laughed at Keanu now walked more carefully, speaking more kindly to guests. The waiters whispered to each other about how much they admired Keanu's humility. The receptionist held her head a little higher, feeling proud that she had at least doubted the manager's words the night before. When Keanu stepped into the lobby later in the day, dressed again in his simple jacket and cap, the mood instantly shifted. Guests smiled warmly, staff straightened their posture, and even children waved at him. He returned each gesture with a soft nod or a wave. Some guests approached, shy but eager, asking for photos. He never refused. He listened, he smiled, he thanked people for their kindness. His patience seemed endless. The manager, watching from a distance, felt both dread and awe. He knew he should apologize again, but fear kept him still. What could he say that would erase the sting of his words? He remembered Keanu's gentle reply, "Everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are," and realized how those words had already spread far beyond the hotel. Social media was filled with that single line, repeated again and again, quoted as though it was a lesson from a teacher to the world. Later in the afternoon, Keanu sat in the restaurant again. This time, more people approached to greet him, and he welcomed them kindly. At one point, he surprised everyone by paying for a family's meal without them knowing. When the waiter delivered the bill, he quietly told them, "It's already taken care of." The family looked around in shock and joy, realizing it had been him. Their gratitude showed in their eyes, but Keanu simply smiled and nodded, saying nothing more. Word of his gesture spread quickly through the staff. The kitchen buzzed with excitement, waiters whispered about it in the hallways, and even the janitorial staff spoke with admiration. "He is not like the others," one of them said. "He doesn't carry himself like he is above anyone." The respect for Keanu grew even deeper, not just because he was famous, but because of the quiet kindness he showed in private moments. By evening, the corporate office sent an official email to all hotel staff. The subject line was simple: urgent, professional conduct and training. The message explained that all staff would undergo a special program on customer service and respect, emphasizing that every guest, regardless of appearance, should be treated with dignity. It also stated that public apologies would be made. Everyone knew the reason behind the sudden action. The incident with Keanu had shaken the foundation of the hotel's image, and now they had to rebuild it carefully. The manager read the email with heavy shoulders. He felt smaller than he ever had before. His pride, once his shield, now felt like his downfall. He realized that in his eagerness to protect the hotel's image, he had destroyed it instead. Worse, he had insulted a man who responded with more grace than he himself could ever show. That evening, Keanu prepared to leave the hotel. His stay had been short, but it had left an impact greater than anyone expected. As he stepped into the lobby with his small backpack once again, people stood to their feet. They didn't cheer loudly or shout, instead, they clapped softly, a gesture of respect. He nodded in return, smiling gently at them, then walked toward the exit. The manager finally gathered the courage to step forward. His voice shook as he spoke, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Mr. Reeves, I am deeply sorry for how I treated you yesterday. I judged you unfairly. You taught me a lesson I will never forget." His words trembled with honesty, his pride stripped away. Keanu looked at him quietly for a moment, then gave a small smile. "It's never too late to change," he said softly. "Treat the next person better than you treated me." And with that, he walked out into the night, leaving the lobby filled with silence and thought. The staff stood still, their eyes following him until he disappeared. The manager lowered his head, tears stinging his eyes not from anger, but from the weight of his regret. He realized that this one encounter would change him forever. Outside, the city lights sparkled, and Keanu walked calmly down the street, blending once again into the crowd like any ordinary man. But for those inside the hotel, he was anything but ordinary. He had left behind not only a story but a lesson carved deep into their hearts: respect is not earned by wealth or titles, it is given freely to every human being. The morning after Keanu left the hotel, the building still carried a quiet buzz. Staff members moved through their routines, but something had changed. They spoke to guests with softer tones, carried themselves with more care, and no one laughed at appearances anymore. It was as though the night before had washed the arrogance out of the air and replaced it with humility. But outside those polished walls, the story had already grown into a storm. News articles appeared everywhere: blogs, newspapers, television segments, and endless social media posts. Headlines repeated the same moment: "You don't belong here, poor guy," followed by minutes later, "He realized it was Keanu Reeves." The world loved the story, not because a manager had failed, but because Keanu's calm and graceful response had shown what true dignity looked like. Reporters praised his patience. Fans across the globe flooded comment sections, writing how much they admired him, not just as an actor but as a person. "He never raised his voice, never acted superior, even when insulted," one commenter wrote. Another said, "This is why the world loves Keanu, he teaches by example." The incident was more than gossip, it had become a lesson people were sharing with their friends and families. At the hotel, the receptionist scrolled through her phone during her break. She saw hundreds of posts, some even using the video she had secretly captured the night before when Keanu told the manager, "Everyone deserves respect." That line was now being quoted like wisdom from a teacher. She smiled, proud that she had witnessed it firsthand. The bellboy who had once laughed now walked quietly, replaying his own mistake in his mind. He realized how easily he had followed the manager's lead without thinking for himself. The memory embarrassed him deeply, but it also gave him a new resolve. From that day forward, he promised himself never to judge anyone by the way they looked. Meanwhile, the manager sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. His inbox was full of angry messages from the corporate office. Some emails came directly from senior executives demanding explanations. Others carried strict instructions about retraining and rebuilding the hotel's image. His heart was heavy as he read through them, knowing all of this was his fault. He had spoken without kindness, and now the whole world knew it. Later that week, the hotel issued a formal public apology. Their statement read, "We deeply regret the way one of our staff members treated Mr. Keanu Reeves. We recognize that respect must be given to every guest, regardless of their appearance or status. Measures are being taken to ensure such an incident never happens again." Though it didn't erase the damage, it was a step toward healing. But for Keanu, none of this mattered. He continued with his life as quietly as he always did. He never spoke to the media about the incident, never sought attention, and never used the situation to embarrass anyone. To him, it was simply another reminder of why humility mattered. He believed that dignity wasn't about proving others wrong, it was about staying true to yourself no matter how others treated you. Stories began to emerge from other places where people had met him. A taxi driver shared online how Keanu had once sat in his car, listening to his stories for the entire ride, tipping him generously at the end. A waitress posted about how he had left her a huge tip after noticing she was tired. Each story added another layer to his reputation, not just as a movie star, but as a man who lived with genuine kindness. Back at the hotel, the atmosphere continued to shift. New training sessions were held, where staff were taught to greet every guest with the same warmth. The receptionist who had quietly doubted the manager now became a role model for others, often reminding her colleagues, "You never know who someone really is. Treat them all with respect." The bellboy became more thoughtful in his work, carrying luggage with extra care, smiling genuinely at everyone he served. The manager himself faced the hardest lesson. For weeks, he struggled with guilt and shame. Everywhere he went in the hotel, he felt the weight of people's eyes on him. Some looked with pity, others with disappointment. But slowly, he began to change. He started greeting guests himself, carrying bags when staff were busy, and even apologizing personally to regular customers for the incident. Though the road was long, he knew he had to rebuild not only his reputation but also his character. Guests who had been there that night continued to tell the story long after Keanu had left. Some told it at family dinners, others at work, and many on social media. It became a favorite anecdote, a story of how humility could silence arrogance. Each time it was told, it began the same way. The manager said, "You don't belong here, poor guy." But minutes later, he realized it was Keanu Reeves. People repeated the line with a mixture of disbelief and admiration, smiling as they remembered how the story ended with kindness winning. Months later, the hotel had managed to rebuild some of its reputation. Guests returned, drawn by curiosity and the promise of improved service. Some even stayed there just to see where the famous incident had happened. The manager, though still humbled, had learned to smile genuinely and treat everyone equally. He no longer walked with his chin held high in arrogance, but with a quieter, more respectful posture. For those who had been present, the memory never faded. They didn't just remember the embarrassment of the manager, they remembered the calm presence of a man who showed grace when he could have shown anger. They remembered the quiet smile, the patient words, and the way he treated every person as if they mattered. And for Keanu Reeves, it was just another day of living as he always had. He never bragged about the incident, never let it define him. Instead, he continued his journey through life, blending into crowds, carrying his old backpack, and reminding the world with his actions that true greatness lies not in fame, but in humility. The story lived on, passed from one person to another, a reminder of how quickly life can turn, how fast arrogance can crumble, and how deeply kindness can touch hearts. And whenever people retold it, they always finished with the same reflection: sometimes the simplest acts like a smile, a gentle reply, or a quiet truth can teach lessons stronger than any speech.